They told you that love would save you, that it would feel like coming home, like safety, warmth, and the long-awaited end to the war you've been fighting inside your chest. They said love was healing, that when it arrived, the pieces would finally fall into place, the chaos would calm, the ache would stop. But they never warned you, sometimes what feels like home is the very thing that hurt you in the first place. Because the truth is, you didn't fall in love with a person, you fell in love with a pattern. A wound disguised as comfort, a familiar ache dressed as connection. You fell for a voice that echoed an old pain, a silence that mirrored a childhood void. Not because it was right, but because it was known. And the human mind, as tragic as it sounds, confuses familiarity with safety, even when it's killing you softly. Some people walk into our lives and feel like déjà vu, not because they're soulmates, but because they fit the shape of our scars. They match the rhythm of our damage, they activate something ancient, a longing, a fear, a memory buried deep in the subconscious. It's not love, it's recognition, the nervous system whispering, "I've felt this before." And that's where the trap begins. Because if you grew up believing love meant chasing, proving, suffering, or surviving, then anything too calm feels suspicious, anything too kind feels alien, anything too stable feels boring. So you run toward the unpredictable, you crave the inconsistency, you fall for the storm, not because it's beautiful, but because it's familiar. And what we crave most is often what broke us first. We say it's love, but beneath that word lies a lie so seductive, we don't question it. Because the truth would ruin the fairy tale. But here's the question no one dares to ask: what if the love you're chasing is actually a trauma in disguise? This wasn't love, not in the way you were taught to recognize it. It was something far more deceptive, far more dangerous. It was a chemical loop, a dopamine spiral, a cycle of emotional highs and soul-crushing lows, engineered not by cruelty alone, but by inconsistency. One moment, you were everything, their eyes lit up when you walked into the room, their words wrapped around you like a promise, a future, a home, a forever. And then, silence, sudden, unexplained, and cold. Not because you changed, but because they needed you to chase. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of addiction creation. More powerful than drugs, more lasting than logic. It's the same principle used in casinos: the slot machine doesn't pay out every time, it pays out randomly. Enough to keep hope alive, not enough to ever satisfy. So you keep pulling the lever, not because you're winning, but because you might. You keep showing up, not because it feels good anymore, but because it used to. They gave you affection, then withdrew, they offered validation, then punished your need for it, they apologized, and repeated. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking, "Is this love?" and started asking, "What did I do wrong?" That's the trick: when the reward is unpredictable, your brain works harder to earn it. And the harder you work, the more invested you become, even if what you're chasing is destroying you. Because the mind doesn't get addicted to people, it gets addicted to possibility. The next message, the next apology, the next breadcrumb that says, "See, they care." But they don't, not in the way you need them to. You weren't in love, you were hooked. And when they finally disappeared, what you missed wasn't even them. It was the fantasy, the dream they dangled in front of you like a carrot. A version of the relationship that existed only in moments, but never in reality. And now you're here, alone, haunted, not by who they were, but by who they pretended to be. You think this started with them, the person who ghosted you, the one who made you beg for breadcrumbs, the one who looked you in the eye and lied. No, this didn't begin with them, this began long before you could choose who to love, long before you understood what love even was. It began in a crib, in the silence between your cries and their response. In the way your mother looked away, in the way your father raised his voice. In the way warmth was sometimes present and sometimes vanished without reason. It began in moments you can't consciously remember, but your body never forgot. Because the human nervous system is a recording device. It doesn't just remember events, it remembers patterns, it wires itself to expect them. So if you grew up in a house where love meant walking on eggshells, where affection had to be earned, where being too much made people disappear, then of course you chase those same dynamics now. You weren't shown love, you were shown conditional approval. Validation wrapped in anxiety, presence wrapped in performance. And now, in adulthood, you call that chaos, chemistry. You say you have a type, that there's something magnetic about people who make you feel unsure, unsteady, unworthy. But that magnet is memory. The echo of your earliest blueprint for love, a blueprint you never chose, but were wired to follow. You don't crave safety, you crave familiarity. Even if familiarity feels like tension, even if it tastes like shame, even if it ends in tears, every time. Because part of you believes, if I can finally earn love from someone who withholds it, maybe I'll finally heal the part of me that never got it when I needed it most. That's not romance, that's reenactment, a repetition of trauma dressed up as desire. The child in you is still trying to rewrite the ending, still trying to make the pain mean something. But the truth is, you're not chasing love, you're chasing a correction. And every toxic relationship is a tragic attempt to fix what someone else broke. They made your heart race, they stirred something primal, electric, all-consuming. They made you feel like the center of the universe, for a moment. And so you told yourself, this must be love. Because nothing else had ever burned so bright, so fast, so painfully alive. But here's the truth no one wants to hear: intensity is not intimacy, chaos is not connection, pain is not passion. What you felt wasn't love, it was adrenaline, it was emotional whiplash. It was your nervous system, trained by trauma, lighting up in the presence of danger, and calling it home. See, when you've lived in emotional drought, even a storm feels like salvation. You mistake the noise for significance, you confuse the turbulence for depth. They didn't love you, they kept you spinning, confused, off balance, hooked on the next gesture, the next apology, the next cruel withdrawal. And in that confusion, you searched for meaning. Because surely, something that feels this intense must mean something, right? But that's the lie. The body responds to fear with the same chemical urgency it does to desire. Your heart races, but not always because it's safe. Sometimes, it races because it's bracing for impact. And when someone knows this, whether consciously or not, they can use your own biology against you. They weaponize unpredictability, affection becomes a tool, silence becomes a punishment, and your longing becomes their leverage. They don't have to raise their voice, they just have to raise your hope, then disappear. Because in a world of emotional starvation, even breadcrumbs feel like a feast. And they knew that. They didn't want love, they wanted control. And they used your softness, your openness, your hope, your need, as the key to lock you inside a cycle you didn't understand, but couldn't escape. It wasn't warmth, it was fire. And fire doesn't hold you, it burns you. You stayed. Even when they shattered your trust, even when they disappeared without warning, even when your soul whispered, please, not again. You stayed, not because it felt good, but because it felt familiar. They were the only pain that ever felt like home. That's not love, that's a trauma bond. And no, it's not because you're weak, it's not because you're broken. It's because your nervous system was trained in chaos. Because once upon a time, love was inconsistent, and now, that inconsistency feels like truth. Trauma bonding is built in confusion, in highs followed by crashes, in words that say, I love you while actions scream you're alone. One moment they made you feel seen, the next, invisible. They heard you, then blamed you, they held you, then vanished. And still, every time they came back, your heart lit up like a matchbox in the dark. Not because you trusted them, but because you hoped. Like an addict seeing the needle again, not for the substance itself, but for the feeling it once promised. Because that's what a trauma bond does, it hijacks your biology. It rewires your brain to crave the very thing that harms you. It turns pain into longing, punishment into purpose, absence into proof that you must try harder. And so you stayed. Because leaving meant facing the withdrawal, the emptiness, the unbearable silence that used to be filled, even if only with chaos. You weren't chasing them, you were chasing the version of them that showed up once. The mask that whispered, this could be love. The potential they waved in front of you like a mirage. But they weren't healing you, they were holding you hostage. Not with chains, but with hope. You didn't fall in love with who they were. You fell in love with who they pretended to be. Healing won't feel like triumph. It will feel like loss. You'll mourn someone who never truly existed, at least not the way you imagined. You'll grieve the dream, the fantasy, the version of them your heart kept building with every apology, every lie dressed as a second chance. You'll delete messages you once read like scripture. You'll block a number that once felt sacred. You'll sit in silence that once felt unbearable, and you'll learn to breathe in it. That silence is not emptiness, it's not punishment. It's your liberation. Because you don't need closure from someone who couldn't even give you consistency. You don't need one last message, one final apology, one perfect ending to make it all make sense. What you need is distance. Distance from the chaos, distance from the cycle, distance from the part of you that kept reaching for what hurt. You don't need to keep bleeding for someone who handed you the knife. You don't need to keep proving your worth to someone who only saw you as an option. You don't need to keep fixing what you didn't break. Healing means walking away, and not in anger, not in revenge. Just walking away. Quietly, finally, completely. You weren't too sensitive, you weren't too needy, you weren't too much. You were simply unloved by someone who didn't know how to love without harm. And that's not your failure. That's their limitation. You bent until you splintered, hoping they'd notice the cracks. You gave more and more until there was nothing left to give, except your silence. And now, in that silence, something is returning. You're beginning to remember who you were before the breaking. Before you started shrinking to fit their moods. Before you questioned your sanity just to preserve the illusion of love. The wound is healing. Not because they came back, not because they said sorry. But because you stayed, for yourself. And in the place where the wound once lived, a boundary grows. Quiet, sacred, strong. They didn't ruin you. They revealed what you still needed to protect, your peace, your worth, your future. You're no longer chasing chaos and calling it love. You're no longer justifying hurt just because you craved closeness. You're no longer mistaking intensity for intimacy. Maybe now, after all the unraveling, after all the pain, you're finally ready to stop proving, stop fixing, stop chasing. And start choosing peace instead. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's yours. And after everything you've survived, that peace, you've earned it. You were never broken. You were becoming.